The 2020 election is less than 6 months away, and as part of our 2020 countdown, we're going to get into some of the polling data and statistics with Kristen Soltis Anderson, who's columnist with the Washington Examiner and a pollster with Echelon Insights. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what can you tell us about some of the polling data or polling data in general that most people don't understand?
Well, a lot of folks after the 2016 election are justifiably very skeptical of polls. A lot of folks feel like, hey, I was told that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, that Trump didn't have a chance, and look how it turned out. So why would I ever listen to a poll again? And whenever folks say that, I don't dismiss that out of hand. That's a very legitimate thing to worry about. The polling industry after 2016 went back and did a huge industry-wide analysis of what went wrong and figured out what had gone wrong. That there were polls nationwide actually were fine, but it was in a handful of these key blue state, swing state type polls that voters without college degrees were not being sampled properly. So nowadays, it's very standard for pollsters to weight their results of their polls by education, to make sure that those voters who don't have college degrees, if they're getting missed by the phone calls, if they're getting missed by the online panels, that those voices are still being heard and are still the right proportion of the poll. And so that gives me more confidence this year in the way a lot of polls are going. So, I think something folks miss about the polls is they go, oh, well, all the polls were wrong in 2016. Why can I trust them? And they don't realize that, a lot of the polls in 2016 were actually pretty good. The national polls, Hillary Clinton did win the national popular vote by 2 to 3 points. That's just not how we pick presidents. So the polls weren't so much wrong as the way they were reported on, I think, led people to believe that the election was going to have an outcome that was different than it did. But also pollsters have done the hard work of fixing what was wrong last time. Now, that doesn't mean nothing will be wrong this time. There could be something that pollsters are missing, and you're kind of always fighting that last battle. But I feel confident that the industry has addressed the problems that were wrong last time. And that if you watch these trend lines in the polls, you can still get a sense of which way the race is trending.
So with respect, you mentioned obviously education levels, whether they have a college degree or not, or they didn't have a college degree, in terms of having their voice represented in polling data. What were some of the other issues, just to give the audience a better idea of some of the issues that they had to address from 2016 and reform in 2020?
Well, the biggest one, of course, is that education gap that you were finding. In past years, we know that gender, race, are you in a rural or urban area, that these are things that are related to your political views. But education level used to not be that big a deal. If you had too many people with bachelor's degrees in your sample, it didn't really affect the result of your poll. Think about it like if I have too many people who are left-handed in my survey, there's really no relationship between being left or right-handed and being left or right leaning in your politics. So it wouldn't matter if I had oversampled or undersampled left-handed people. But if
Right.
all of a sudden that becomes important and a politician is like, putting forward a message that's really off-putting to people in one group or the other, suddenly I've got to make sure that matters. So we found that with education, that was the new one in 2016. We don't know if there will be a new variable in 2020. But something I do know is that we're seeing a really interesting shift in the generational politics around 2020. That over the last decade, we've seen Republicans do kind of poorly with younger voters, Democrats doing poorly with older voters. That's becoming scrambled. And so pollsters are going to have to make sure, extra sure, that they've got the right age balance in their sample, because it's been important, but it's becoming, it's changing the politics of this race. And if you don't get that right, you're going to miss potential trends.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned how, some of these voices that weren't represented in 2016 are now being represented in 2020. But you also mentioned the fact that with respect to the 2016 polls, they weren't necessarily wrong. They largely got it right. It was just in these particular pockets, say the Rust Belt states. We're seeing somewhat of an interesting trend in the 2020 election because you have Joe Biden now leading President Trump in national polls, according to Real Clear Politics average. Do you see a repeat of what's going to happen in 2020 from 2016, where, sure, Biden could get the national popular vote, but lose in the Electoral College?
It's entirely possible. And, because the Electoral College hasn't changed since 2016. And I think the demographic coalition that Trump put together in 2016 has not changed a great deal. He is struggling a bit more among seniors than he did in 2016, which is a big red flag for the campaign and is the subject of my column coming out this week at the Examiner, which is why it's a topic fresh on my mind. But by and large, his coalition still looks pretty much the same. And so, from time to time, you'll hear these stories about, the Trump campaign wants to go compete in New Mexico, or like they're trying to add states to the map. And if I was advising them, I would suggest play defense. You won last time by winning a certain set of states. Your coalition looks pretty much the same as last time. So play defense in those places that you won last time. Does it mean you're going to win the national popular vote? Not necessarily. There could be another split, which I think if you do have another split between the national popular vote and the Electoral College, the pressure will be even greater to try to amend the Constitution or do something different. But it's a real possibility that it could happen again this time and that the electoral map could look pretty similar.
So one interesting aspect of this is that while Biden leads in the Real Clear Politics average in the national vote or national polling, Trump is leading in betting odds, which I find fascinating. In your mind, which source should be trusted in this scenario?
So the betting odds are in some ways a lagging indicator, I think, that reflects a little bit of conventional wisdom. And I think you are seeing folks figure, look, the polls show Biden up by 6 or so points nationally. In a lot of swing states, he's doing reasonably well. But there's an assumption that if the polls got it wrong last time, are they going to get it wrong and in the same direction this time? And if so, you can probably get a pretty good deal on buying, shares of Trump in these betting markets. So I think there is an assumption among many that like the polls are going to still have gotten it wrong and are going to get it wrong in the same direction. And I think that's a dangerous thing to assume because, the polls got it wrong a little bit in 2012 by overestimating the Republican share. You may recall Gallup on election day in 2012, they thought that Romney was going to win 49 to 48. You had a lot of polls that systemically, because they weren't calling enough cell phones, there was a systemic problem. They were missing younger voters who are African American, Latino, et cetera. So it wound up understating Obama's vote share. So then you fast forward 4 years and then the polls miss in the other direction. They're undercounting core Republican voters. So it's dangerous to assume that the way things were wrong last time is the way they're going to be wrong the next time. I suspect that it's no guarantee that the polls are going to be perfect, for sure.
Right.
But there's also no guarantee that if they're off, they're going to be off in a direction that's understating Trump's support. It very well could be the other way around.
Interesting. Finally, just so that our audience is aware, what's like the one poll or indicator in your mind that voters and analysts should keep an eye on as like a good barometer of this race?
So right now you have ballot test questions where you're saying, who are you going to vote for, Trump versus Biden? And sometimes they'll ask it with other candidates like Justin Amash. Sometimes they'll just ask the head-to-head. Try to look at the three-way ballot test if you can. If this is going to be a closely fought race, seeing which way those third-party candidates pull off even just a tiny bit of the vote, I don't think they're going to have a huge impact, but in a closely fought race, that matters. But the other thing I would watch is Trump's job approval on the economy. Right now, one of the things political scientists are struggling with is typically you look at the economy in the second quarter of a president's fourth year to determine, okay, how are they going to get reelected? And GDP this quarter is going to be atrocious. Yet we're still seeing, even though Trump's job approval is in like the mid 40s, his job approval on the economy tends to be 6 to 8 points higher, depending on the poll you're looking at. So folks are maybe less thrilled with the handling of COVID, but they're not blaming him for the economic devastation we're seeing. That economic devastation is because people are trying to protect one another by staying at home and closing offices. So I would watch that economic job approval to see if at any point voters shift and begin punishing Trump for the economic situation, or does that economic job approval stay firm, and therefore people who may not love the tweets or may not love Trump's personality, are they still saying, look, he's the one I trust to handle an economic recovery? I want him in charge. I don't feel like changing up coaches in the middle of the game.
Mm.
Those are the two numbers that I would watch: the ballot test that includes third parties and that economic job approval.
Well, Kristen Soltis Anderson, columnist with the Washington Examiner and pollster with Echelon Insights, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.